All right, everybody, welcome. I have my special guest here. This is Professor Rachel Fulton Brown. She studies history, among other things, and we're going to talk about the intimacy crisis and give a little historical perspective on that. And we'll probably touch on a bunch of other things just to round things out, because I think a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about, we'll say, how what we're going through today is not entirely dissimilar from other incidents in the past, and maybe that'll help guide us through these crises, whether you want to categorize them as meaning crises, which I think is the result of the intimacy crisis, roughly speaking, or you want to call it the meta crisis, or crisis of the week, however you want to do that. And hopefully I now have the historical firepower to help me disentangle some of this. So feel free to introduce yourself.
Okay, I'll do my best. So I teach at the University of Chicago, and my specialty is European history with focus on medieval Christianity. But I've taught there for 30 years in a number of different capacities. So let's do it. I have a question for you first. What do you mean by the intimacy crisis? What is that? That is it's clearly something you've been talking about before. So what is it that you're most curious about?
Yeah, so for me, John Vervaeke came up with this wonderful YouTube series, Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, which is not correctly named. It should be Awakening to the Meaning Crisis. Doesn't contain the from part. And we were researching this for quite a while because, from my perspective, that's the science of meaning that sort of helps you understand the pragmatic approach that Jordan Peterson has to the same problem. I mean, they're colleagues, right? Or they were colleagues at the University of Toronto. We're talking about the same thing, using slightly different language in some cases. John likes to invoke a lot of Greek words and co-opt a few Latin words in the process, sometimes to great effect.
People who are doing that are usually just labeling. It's just the same thing in English, but in a different language. It's a fancy trick.
Right.
Beware of them. Beware of them.
Right. Well, and I think I'll bring that up too. So when I looked at the meaning crisis, and one of the unique features of the meaning crisis is, wow, it seems to be a lot of men. It's very mysterious.
A lot of men. Okay.
Yeah. Why are there all these men? And it occurred to me that one way to think about this whole milieu of problems, if you will, is men go through a meaning crisis, women have an intimacy crisis. Now, I think the intimacy crisis precedes the meaning crisis, because the way I describe the intimacy crisis is the following. You don't have the ability, for whatever reason, we can get into that, to make and understand and maybe even see quality relationships. So maybe you see relationships, but they're all physical. You don't see the different qualities of relationships. And so you would come up with what I would call strange questions, like, what's the difference between, a friendship and your best friendship? Or why can't your spouse be your best friend? Or, all these silly, in my opinion, silly ways of thinking about the world that's very kind of flat. Like, oh, well, I have the same relationship with my spouse that I have with my friend. Like, that doesn't, or my sister or my brother or my cousin or, some guy I met on the internet. Like, these are all relationships with different qualities. And for Vervaeke, for example, is kind of there, right? He talks about qualia, which is, and to your point, like, these are just fancy words. We have better words.
I mean, sometimes, and I'm revising that in my head. It's like sometimes it does help to use them as a technical label for things, but it's challenging because sometimes people are using them as a mystifier as opposed to a clarifier. It's just
right.
I know a lot of Latin, but I also know when doctors are using it to disguise the fact that they don't know what you're sick with. So it can go both ways.
Yeah, well, and the language is a problem, and so, for example, one sort of example of what I call the flattening of the world is people will go, "Oh, that's all jargon," and it's like, no, no,
Mm,
jargon's a thing, but that's actually not jargon. There's something
right.
else going on, and people can't differentiate those things because they don't understand quality. And so, one of the examples I gave in one of the talks I did, I think it was my first talk on the intimacy crisis. Um, some I did with this YouTube channel called Andrea with the Bangs, who's a very sweet person. And she said, "Oh, do you think this has something to do with why people think that Sam and Frodo and Lord of the Rings must be gay?" And I'm like, "Yes, exactly." Right. Because if you don't understand that sort of a relationship that man can have for another man that isn't physical, right? But it's
Mhm.
a deep mutual respect and understanding and a level of submission based on a recognition. Well, this guy is clearly better than I am at something, or clearly has a level of understanding that I don't have. And I'm not going to sleep with him, but I
Well, I
am
mean, with
discovered
Frodo
for a
and
fault.
with Frodo and Sam, it's master and servant. It's quite clear. It's Frodo is the officer and Sam is the Batman who, in World War One terms, the servant who takes care of
Mm,
him. And I mean, that's why he calls him Master Frodo the whole time. And then
right.
when he himself has to take on that role of decision making, he in the chapter title he's Master Samwise, so he has to then assume that responsibility because Frodo was knocked out by Shelob's sting, and then but when he comes back he is servant. So it's not only just intimacy that we don't understand the social relationships of leadership and service in
Right.
that particular example. The other if we
Right.
want to talk hobbits, I can do that, endlessly because I mean all four of them have a very interesting problem. Of Pippin's the youngest, Merry's the most responsible, Frodo is obviously the one that carries the great burden, and Sam is the servant to Frodo. That it's like they're not just four guys, right? There's a lot of very subtle and important relationships that Tolkien's showing through those characters.
Right. Well, and I think part of the reason why people even will say very smart people, well, I have my questions about their smartness, but people you would consider very smart don't understand like what you just outlined, which is no, there's all these inherent relationships. I think this is what I'm calling the flattening of the world. When you flatten the world,
Mm,
you destroy quality because quality is
right.
on this line that just for the sake of people who actually don't know better, obviously you way understand this better, is on what like Vervaeke and Peterson and those guys are calling the line of vertical causality, which is strangely correct and yet so missing the point at the same time, right? And so that's what causes the intimacy crisis is you basically can't see up or down for that matter. And so
Mm.
the side effect is you don't
Oh, so
recognize
yeah,
either.
the sort of flattening of the equality language that we're all
Yes,
supposed to be equal. Okay,
right.
so I'm hearing a variety of ways. I say before we came on, you were asking me how you should introduce me, and I'm like, well, which me do you want? And I think I get it. I'll offer you a few. Right, one
Sure.
is I'm nearly 60, so that makes me I'll be 60 in February, right? I that gives me a particular viewpoint as someone who's lived through some of the stories that you're trying to understand. It's like what happened to us in the 70s after, you know, abortion became readily available. How did those of us who grew up, Gen Xers, right? We
Mm,
we have a role right now. We got to speak up because a lot of the
right.
things that I think the present younger generations are dealing with are things that we were subjected to, fell silent about, and now really need to talk about, right? So that's one layer. Another is, of course, as historian and as someone who's thought about the long development of Christianity and certain kinds of language about love and sexuality that come out of that tradition. And then there's Tolkien, which I can also talk in depth about because I teach a course on Tolkien for many years at the university, and I've also done a series of videos about some of that, right? So if people want more on that part of my background, we can point them to that. But it's like where would you most want to go with what you're describing? Because I think for women's intimacy crisis, one, I am one, so there you go. And my credit, I'll say my, my credential is I'm nearly 60, and I think also that, because of different conversations I've been in over the most recent years on the internet, my praising men and chivalry and so forth. The opposite side is like what women's romantic thinking is like, and like why do, I mean, if we have an intimacy crisis, I think actually women are talking about it all the time, but it's not in the place where people tend to want to acknowledge, which is in romance novels, obviously, and
Right.
the sort of imagery that comes out of that. So I'm happy to go in any of those different directions.
Okay. Let me lay out, I think, just three things, and you can touch on them or not. I'll just try to give you a sense for the framing and where I'm coming from. But
Mm.
yeah, and this is so perfect. Having you here is so perfect. I appreciate it.
I'm gonna land on the fact that I'm nearly 60 about 18 times, right? It's like,
That's fine. That's fine. We're good.
guys, we
Yeah.
lived through this, right? It's now time to listen to those of us who are old enough to be your grandparents and aren't necessarily yet, for lots of complicated reasons having to do with what happened as we were growing up, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I think there's all sorts of ways in which just the knowledge of previous generations has also been disrupted and shattered.
Yeah, completely. And
Yeah.
I mean, you see it in storytelling, right? The
Oh
heroes are
yeah.
always children now. It's like, what? No, please stop. Yeah, and yeah, the whole idea of hero. But so there's three sort of things that I'm sort of curious about. So I don't know if you're familiar with Jonathan Pageau. So he talks about, you know, we've lost the way that medievals thought about the world. And I'm like, oh, that's definitely wrapped up in this. And my suspicion is, and again, I mean, we can get into this or not. I just want to lay it on the table. If we touch on it, we
I
do.
will challenge Jonathan's background in medieval for real.
I do too, because he hasn't said what he means by that, right? So
No,
he's
I
like,
think I've talked to him a few times on his show, but that was a long time ago. And my sense is he uses medieval as a frame for missed, right? There's a lost time that we wish we had access to, which is
right,
appropriate, right? Because that's one of the things that medieval is. It's that whole tradition that the Enlightenment and the 19th century, well, the Enlightenment actively destroyed.
right,
The 19th century, which is, I think, where Jonathan is usually operating in his medievalisms, enchanted and then replayed, right?
yeah,
Particularly in things like fairy tales, and then in the 20th century forgot. Right. So medieval can mean a lot of different things as well. Yeah.
right,
Okay. So
right. But I
I'm
think
staking out my expertise now.
that's good. That's good. Yeah, and I think what was lost, if you will, is not, we'll say, knowledge as conveyed by books or schools or dare I say, even we'll say, traditional learning. I think it's knowledge by way of the frames that were assumed, that you sort of automatically, you were born into a caste. You're just like, of course I was. You never question that sort of thing, because there's no reason to, and not never, but like it was assumed. And now we're living in this sort of equality thing, and the equality is sort of brought about by what I call the age of Gnosis, which is where you think knowledge as propositions or language as such is the highest value. And then everybody can be equal, because of course you can just send somebody to school and they get knowledge. Everybody knows that. uh, right? And then bang, we're all, that's a lot of where the equality comes from. Of course, that creates its
I
own set
accept.
of problems.
Yes, I accept that description. Your description of the medieval, I don't accept. But I think you're right about the way in which we use the claim of equalizing through the particular kind of education we get. But it's a flattening. I totally agree with you on that.
Yeah, it's a flattening to propositions. John Vervaeke actually coined the term propositional tyranny, and I was like,
Mm,
oh, that's mysteriously correct, and yet
yes.
it misses something important. And so from that, we got the age of Gnosis, which is this age where it's knowledge, but it's only propositional knowledge. And then what's happening is, as the propositional knowledge, the propositional tyranny breaks down, because it can't explain a bunch of things like every important thing in the world, like love Right. I mean,
Yes.
this
No,
is this
I
is right.
agree with that. That's a good description. I like that.
Right. So then what they're doing is they're adding to knowledge, which actually I kind of agree with John on some of that, right? He talks about propositional knowledge versus participatory knowledge. And I'm like, actually, that's really good framing, even though he's wrong. I mean, yes, participation is super important, but and now we're rediscovering Girard and mimicry, and I'm like, really, this is not something you got by being in the world and like.
Oh, Girard, I love your my team of poets and I use a lot of Girard, so we can talk about that definitely.
Yeah, I'm not
Yeah.
a super huge fan of Girard, but he's got some
Well,
good points.
we can talk about that. Thus
Yeah.
far you haven't named anybody I'm a super huge fan of. So I
Oh,
mean,
okay.
except Girard, right? But
Okay.
so I think, but I mean, based on what you're describing, I'd say this is my frustration as an actual historian of medieval, like, prayer, liturgy, devotion, art. I mean, medieval studies, but none of those things actually fit in the category that people tend to think of now as like what we're able to talk about as historians, because they have an interior that is hard for us to access. Most of what you're describing as you're feeling like there's something lost gets nowhere near the richness of what's actually been lost. I mean,
Right.
it's horrifying and tragic. But there's hope because, ironically, we are in a situation where more of these texts are available in English than have ever been in the history of any time,
Mm,
right? It's like the last 30 years have been a magnificent renaissance, if you will, of translation of medieval texts. And it's strange that therefore we don't have in the modern public discussion an actual understanding of what's in those texts, because they're all available in languages that people can, modern people tend to read now, not just Latin. The place where I think I'll try to put in something more rigorous, where you're describing how you knew who you were in the Middle Ages. You participated in the liturgy, and the
mhm.
sort of givenness of, I mean, things like social hierarchy. We're born into social hierarchies now. I mean, that's a kind of, it's a massive fiction that the United States depends on for our education system, to the pretense that we have no social
Right. Of
hierarchies. We definitely do. And
course we
we
do.
have regional hierarchies. I mean, certainly the promise of the educational hierarchy, which is why, we've promoted it in the way that we have since World War II, is, you can go into that system and come out middle class, right?
Right.
That only works if you have this concept of a thing called middle class. You're not going to go into that education system and come out a lord, an aristocrat, because we don't have them.
Exactly.
But I mean, I'm guessing you're Canadian. I don't know
No.
this. You're
Nope.
not. Okay. You
No.
have some northern. Where are you from?
I grew up in New England.
Ah, yes, okay. Yes, you don't have my speech patterns, right? Because so
Nope.
there's that kind of, I mean, New England has a definite, like, hierarchical status against the rest of the country that none of us will ever
Yep.
catch up to, because no Rice or University of Chicago, one place I went to as an undergraduate, one place I teach, will ever be the Harvard of anything, but not Harvard, right? It's like
That's right.
we have a lot of that feeling of hierarchy in our own system. But the promise of the go into the middle class, you will therefore not be working class, right? And if you
Right.
think about what's just happened in our most recent election, it's a battle between those two classes, right? It's a battle between the
Yeah.
college educated and the working class. We've told ourselves stories about who we are as Americans for a long time that don't fit anything that we really are. And a lot of what we think we know about the Middle Ages, I mean, if you're from New England, you'll have read Mark Twain. Yes. Connecticut Yankee, right?
Yep.
How much of your imagination of the Middle Ages depends on that book?
Yeah. No, it's a
Yeah.
good point.
I mean,
Right.
the evil, enslaving Catholic Church. It's like a lot of modern thinking about what the Middle Ages was is anti-Catholic, right?
Right.
Straight up, right? So it's like I feel, I thinking of fairy tales wise. It's like the Middle Ages has been asleep for all this time, and the thorns have grown up, and we need to, like, cut our way through all of those thorns to find the actual princess, because we don't we w- a good deal of modernity's self-conception depends on that vilification of the Middle Ages, because we're not that, right? Just as
Right.
a good deal of the middle class self-perception depends on vilifying the working class, saying we're not that.
Right, right. Well, there's a lot of what my good friend Manuel Post calls identification against, where
Yes.
you're not
Yes.
identifying
Right.
what you are, you're not standing on anything or standing for anything or standing anywhere,
Right.
or at least, that's what you're projecting, that you're not standing anywhere, right? Which is of course impossible, so it comes out anyway. While at the same time, you're relying on your identification as not this well identified thing, this thing that I
Yes.
understand.
Yes, you're the negative image of that demon.
Right. And that's
Which,
very binary. That's what I call binary thinking.
well, and from my perspective as, both a Christian and a medievalist, it's incredibly frustrating because it means even to the extent now in, modern political usage, we're saying there's such a thing as Christian nationalism. I'm like, not really. Or, that
Yeah.
there's, Christ is king. Well, yes, but not the way you're hoping. That there's a impoverishment, desperate impoverishment of our idea of you know the actual mystery that we are baptized into. And
Right.
I would one, of the many great lies that were promulgated about the Middle Ages. They started with Luther in 1520 or thereabouts, claiming that the clergy had never taught the laity anything. And that's just a
Mm.
flat out misrepresentation of indeed his own audience, right? That Luther in the Reformation would not have had all of those readers hungry for the knowledge of what was in the scriptures if in fact there hadn't been hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of education. So,
Exactly.
the primary claim that the Protestants make, which is what Mark Twain is playing with in Connecticut Yankee, right? It's like, oh, the clergy kept the peasantry in ignorance because that's the only way they could, exert their mystifying power over them. And I'm like, are you kidding? Have you ever read medieval history about how it's nothing but the preachers trying to figure out how better to preach? Right.
Right. Right.
That we have whole orders of Franciscans and Dominicans who are designed, their entire education is designed around how do you teach Christianity better, right?
Right.
So
Right.
the Protestant Reformation is the first giant lie, which has some layers of effect because of my great hero is Marshall McLuhan. So I hope you like him because we're going to hear about him now. That having a media transformation does change the way in which people think about what it means to know things. And
Right.
with the printing press and with the books that come in, which are invented in the Middle Ages because everybody wants to read more, right? It's like, oh, the Middle Ages didn't have the printing press, right? The Middle Ages invented the printing press because they wanted more books, and the first things they start printing are prayer books, not just
Right.
Bibles, but prayer books, and they learn to say the Psalms. So fast forward 100 years, and you get the population of Europe, hungry for knowledge about Christ and the prayer and how better to be Christian. The Reformation makes no sense if nobody cared, right? It's like
Right. Right.
you don't get everybody that excited about the need for knowledge of the Gospels if they weren't already in a position to care that they have that, like we are now, right? It's like you and I are having this conversation online because people are actually hungry for knowledge. I mean, we may not have as big an audience as some people online, right? But
Yeah.
there's enough people out there now, and I mean, you're saying the men have a knowledge. You started that with women have an
Meaning.
intimacy crisis, men
Yep.
have a meaning
Meaning
crisis.
crisis. Yep.
The one truest thing that Jordan Peterson said